Welcome to second quarter, everybody. How are you feeling about finishing the first quarter of your senior year? This. Where are you gonna put your thumb? That's good, Molly, a little bit good. She's like at a 45-degree angle. Kaylee's like sideways. Anybody else? I'm gonna try to get you here, we'll see. Oh, somebody actually used a reaction button, nice. All right, well, I hope you read my couple paragraphs to you and how much I appreciate you guys and how much work that you've been doing. Like a lot of stuff that we just kind of do together in class, I end up kind of giving us not formal assignments, but things that you have to do on your own. So, but I also feel like we have to do what we have to do, you know, cover the whole curriculum. So it's a tough balance, but you guys are doing great. And like I said, I don't think the grades would be that different, even if we were doing like high stakes testing, which we're kind of not, but we did on Wednesday and Thursday. Okay, so those are, you already see the multiple choice one, that curve is applied and everything. The written, the FRQs, about 2/3 of the way through grading. I will either have those done today, hopefully today, but at the very latest tomorrow, because we'd have to finalize grades by tomorrow night. There are some, I have plenty of people who got like 4, 5, or 6, you know, 6 out of 6 in some cases. And I have people that get, you know, on the low end too, but I've got the grading scale set up where I don't think it's gonna, you know, if you're doing well otherwise, I don't think it's gonna devastate your grade for the whole quarter or anything. Hopefully I'll have those up tonight, but at the very latest, like I said, tomorrow. So a little note on participation. I'm gonna kind of I'm gonna push you a little bit more. Of my 2 classes, you guys tend to talk more than the other one, but that doesn't mean that all of you are doing that. It's kind of a minority still speaking up. So I am still going to give you credit for being in class in the live sessions, and then more credit for, you know, actually raising your hand. And just to show you, okay, I'm not making this up, I really do this, okay? All these little dots, you see me leaning over when you guys are talking, I'm giving you credit, okay? But I'm gonna start you at a 75 this quarter instead of an 85, okay? So if you just leave that alone, come to sessions once in a while and never speak up, sorry, Anna, let you in. Then, you know, that's going to be a part of your grade that's going to drag you down a little bit, okay? And I don't want it to be a punishment. I want it to be, like it always is, an opportunity for you to secure a part of your grade is 100% just by trying and being present and speaking up, okay? But it's a 9-week quarter, okay? If you got an 85 to 100 in like 3 weeks, like a lot of you guys did, then you can certainly get a 75 to 100 in 9 weeks, okay? Mostly just by attending, but certainly by raising your hand and kind of getting that out of the way. Plus, I just don't think it's good if we sit, you know, even if you're coming here, if you never talk, you know, the whole time, I think you just kind of fade into the cracks, and there's only so much you're going to absorb if we're not like kind of going back and forth, you know, closest I can come to a real classroom. Okay, so over to our agenda real fast here. Routine stuff kind of starting back up. We were in the middle of vocab lesson 3. We did the unit. So now we're doing, you know, the week 2 of that, which means vocab creative usage for lesson 3. That's due tonight. Okay, 8 out of those 10 words, and then we'll create a paragraph, highlight them, underline them, or whatever. Grammar lesson 11 is also posted with the usual quick video. Reviews what's going on and what I want you to do. Let's do it Wednesday night. And then other things are, we are starting a poetry unit. Okay, so let's take a look at that over in EP class. You can just look at my screen share. You don't really need to go in yourself. Might have logged me out. There we go. All right, so we finished all this stuff, right? All those videos, all those skills. Now we're going on to unit 2 of 9 units. So what is this all about? Okay, so we still have our videos that we'll be digging into soon, some topic question practices, and then we have a multiple choice and free response assessments that'll happen a couple weeks from now. So I'm going to dig into the unit guide real fast here. Let's just take a look at, you know, we're not learning everything about poetry in one unit. This is kind of a more introductory unit, which is why we're going to read into a chapter called What is Poetry in Class. But the things we're going to look at, you'll notice they kind of overlap. Okay, so the first one is about characters in literature. Allow readers to study and explore a range of values, beliefs, and assumptions. And we want to be able to identify and describe what textual details reveal about a character, that character's perspective, and the character's motives. Now that is similar, it is the same one that we looked at with prose, but you know, you might think, well, why are we doing that with poetry? There's not characters in poetry. Well, there is, not always, but more often than not, the speaker is sometimes an invented character, not necessarily just the poet's voice. And then in more kind of narrative poems, you know, where you actually have at least a series of events, if not something you could call a plot, there can be characters for sure. Structure, explain the function of structure in a text, explain the function of contrast within a text, and structure in poetry is going to have more to do with lines and stanzas, right? That is the technical difference between poetry and prose, right? Is that in prose, it's written in paragraphs. You just go across the page, so you go to the next line. In poetry, it's a conscious decision how many words you put where on each line, and the kind of divisions that you make. 4 lines and 4 lines and 4 lines, or 8 and then 6, or something like that. Okay, so we, structure always has a function, or often has a function, so we want to be able to kind of analyze that. Next is figurative language. Okay, so this is new. Okay, now not that there's not figurative language in prose. There certainly can be, metaphors and symbols and things like that in short stories and novels and plays. But it comes most heavily in poetry. It's part of what drives poetry, right? Comparisons, representations, and associations shift meaning from the literal to the figurative and invite readers to interpret a text. So we want to explain the functions of specific words and phrases in a text. It gets into the kind of the grammar of that, right? So our grammar actually connects to poetry a lot more than you probably think. And then the functions of similes and metaphors, and those are kind of outlined here. Okay, so the kind of the basic building blocks of figurative language there. We'll do a whole chapter on this. And finally, we're going to aim toward the same thing. Believe it or not, we're still not doing full essays. We're going to just aim toward developing a paragraph that includes a defensible claim and the evidence itself and some analysis, and basically do the equivalent with poetry, with what we do with prose. Okay, so that's that. Come off our screen share here, and if you guys could get this out and turn to page 657. 657. Okay, so it's the first poetry chapter in here called "What is Poetry?" We're basically just going to read in the first couple pages, and then I'm going to ask you. You might have seen the assignment post go up after second bell, and you guys do a couple discussion questions on a couple pretty short poems, with the idea that we're going to, when we read a poem, we want to look at it carefully and slowly and repeatedly, rather than just reading through it one time, like you would do with prose, or short story or something. So, spirit reading for credit, of course. Would somebody like to start us off? Go ahead, Sophia. Thank you.
What is poetry? Poetry is as universal as language and almost as ancient. The most primitive peoples have used it. The most civilized have cultivated it. In all ages and in all countries, poetry has been written and eagerly read or listened to by all kinds and conditions of people, by soldiers, statesmen, lawyers, homemakers, farmers, doctors, scientists, clergy, philosophers, kings, and queens. In all ages, it has been especially the concern of the educated, the intelligent, and the sensitive, yet it has appealed in its simpler forms to the uneducated and to children. Why? First, because it has given pleasure. People have read it, listened to it, or recited it because they liked it, because it gave them enjoyment. But this is not the whole answer. Poetry in all ages has been regarded as important, not simply as one of several alternative forms of amusement, as one person might choose bowling, another chess, and another poetry. Rather, it has been regarded as something central to existence, something having unique value to the fully realized life, something that we are better off for having and without which we are spiritually impoverished. To understand the reasons for this, we need to have at least a provisional
I think Anna was trying to break in.
Okay.
Which is how it's supposed to work, so good.
To have at least a provisional understanding of what poetry is. Provisional because people have always been more successful at appreciating poetry than at defining it.
And pause for just a sec here. Poetry has been regarded as something central to existence, something having unique value to the fully realized life. Is that how you guys feel about poetry? Probably not, right? But what's the primary way that some sort of poetry is, part of your life? Because for the most part, I think it is, high schoolers. In a sense. Can't think of anything? Cohort people. What did we do on Friday that you guys actually got pretty excited about, or on Thursday, I guess? Music. Yeah. I mean, surely there's been some point in your life, or many points in your life, when you're feeling a certain way strongly about something, especially if it was, especially if you're kind of down or struggling with something, and there's some sort of song lyric that just kind of really rang true with you and made you feel like, hey, I'm not the only person who has felt like this, and made you feel a little bit better because you didn't feel so much alone like that. I certainly hope that at some point in your life you felt that. um,
Dr. Seuss.
what's that, Bobby?
Dr. Seuss when we're little.
When we're little, what?
Dr. Seuss, the books we read.
Oh, sure, yeah, absolutely, right. And that's prose that's almost written in verse, and yeah, that probably stuck with you a lot, definitely. Okay, and maybe a little bit more when you were kids, as far as like poetry. But I think I think it can matter, and I think song lyrics are poetry as much as anything else. And I think if you give it a serious enough study, maybe some of these poems will ring with you the same way that some favorite song lyrics might. So, all right, next paragraph. Initially, poetry might be defined as a kind of language that says more and more intensely, and I would say in a smaller amount of space, than does ordinary language. So to understand this fully, we need to understand what poetry says. So for language is employed on different occasions to say quite different kinds of things. In other words, language has different uses.
Perhaps
You guys want to fight it out? Go ahead, Carly. I think you started first.
The most common use of language is to communicate information. We said that it's 9 o'clock, that we liked a certain movie, that George Washington was the first president of the United States, that bromine and iodine are members of the halogen group of chemical elements. This might call the practical use of language. It helps us with ordinary business of living.
But as it is not primarily to communicate information, that novels, short stories, plays, and poems are written. These exist to bring us a sense of perception of life, to widen and sharpen our context with existence. Their concern is with experience. We all have an inner need to live more deeply and fully with our greater awareness, to know the experiences of others, to understand our own experiences better. Poets from their own store felt, observed, or imagined experiences, select, combine, and reorganize. They create significant new experiences for their readers, significant because focused and formed, in which readers can participate and form which they may gain a greater awareness for understanding for the world. Literature, in other words, can be used as a gear for stepping up the intensity or increasing the range of our experiences and as a glass for clarifying it. This is the literary use of language for literature, not only an aid to living, but a means of living.
In advertisements, sermons, political speeches, and even some poems, we find a third use of language as an instrument of persuasion or argument. But the distinctions among these three uses, the practical, the literary, and the argumentative, are not always clear-cut, since some written language simultaneously performs two or even all three functions. For example, an excellent poem we consider literary may convey information and may also try to persuade us to share a particular point of view. Effectiveness in communicating experience, however, is one essential criterion for any poem aspiring to the condition of literature.
Suppose, for instance, that we are interested in eagles. If we want simply to acquire information about eagles, we may turn to an encyclopedia, a book of natural history, or Wikipedia. We would find that there are about 55 species of eagles, and that most have hooked bills, curved claws, broad wings, and powerfully developed breast muscles. We would also learn that eagles vary in length from about 16 inches to as long as 40 inches, that most hunt while flying, though some await their prey on a high perch, that they nest in tall trees or on inaccessible cliffs, that they lay only one or two eggs, and that for human beings, eagles symbolize power, courage, freedom, and immortality, and have long been used as national, military, and heraldic emblems and as symbols in religion.
But unless we are interested in this information only for practical purposes, we are likely to feel a little disappointed, as though we had grasped the feathers of an eagle, but not its soul. Sure, we have learned many facts about the eagle, but we have missed somehow its loneliness, its power, and the wild grandeur of its surroundings of the world make the eagle a living creature rather than a mere museum specimen. a living eagle, we must learn literature.
Okay, thanks, guys. So we have The Eagle by Alfred Lord Tennyson, and we have Winter by William Shakespeare, and none other, on this next couple pages. And I'd just like for you to do those discussion questions on each one. Whenever you see vocabulary ones, like number 1 and the second one, you can just skip those. Okay, so the 2 things that these are going to kind of focus on, that the chapter will continue to focus on, are number 1, something I like to call a compression, and that has to do with how poetry says a lot in a small amount of space. Okay, so you might even think of it as, all right, a poem that is 1 page and a short story that's 10 pages might require the same amount of time and attention, right? And you might not be used to just, it doesn't mean you just stare at it the whole time, but you might need to purposely read a poem several times, kind of hear it, mouth it to yourself, if not read it out loud, and definitely read it more than once to really get everything that is there smashed into a small amount of space and not necessarily in a straightforward literal presentation, right? And then the other is that poetry doesn't always have to be beautiful, right? Just like literary fiction compared to commercial fiction isn't always going to be happy ending satisfying. Hopefully, that doesn't mean that it still can't be intellectually satisfying. So same thing with poetry, probably a little bit more on the emotional side than just intellectually satisfying. But it doesn't have to be beautiful. Sometimes it can be ugly even and still be powerful. And we'll definitely learn that with another poem we move forward with. Okay, so you see your assignments, everything's on the agenda. That's it. Anybody got any questions about anything? Y'all good? All right. Good to see you.